Welcome to the deep dive.
Huh.
So today we're basically tearing open the textbooks. I mean, almost literally.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
The sources you sent us are it's this incredibly sharp analysis of how American history is taught, or maybe how it's mistaught.
Right.
We're doing a deep dive into James Loewen's critique, Lies My Teacher Told Me,
Mm.
and we're really going right to the heart of what's wrong with the stories we all grew up with.
Exactly. And our mission today is, it's a heavy one, but it's really essential. We need to unpack how these history textbooks actually build up our national myths. And we're not just talking about, little mistakes here and there. We're talking about a systematic process, how the past gets sanitized, what crucial truths get left out, and then what are the real-world costs of all that misinformation.
And the sources set that tone right away. They ask this really basic question. Why is history class so often boring?
Yeah.
Why is it so forgettable? And part of it is, like a physical problem. These books are huge. They average 4.5 pounds.
4.5 pounds.
888 pages. They're just packed with detail. But somehow they completely miss the drama, the real friction of the American past. And, the sources argue that students are right to be bored by them.
Well, that's the irony, isn't it? I mean, Loewen's whole point is that history teaching is dominated by these huge, predictable books. And the central idea, the thing we really have to focus on, is that they systematically omit or sanitize or just plain distort major truths.
And it's not by accident.
No, not at all. It's a form of power, really. Cultural and political power that shapes how we see ourselves as a nation. It presents history as just a list of facts to be learned, not a furious debate informed by evidence. And by doing that, they strip out all the controversy, all the nuance, and you're left with just names and dates.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of this. I mean, if a book is 888 pages long.
And 4.5 pounds.
Right. How does it, in this crazy attempt to be comprehensive, end up leaving out everything we actually need to know? It's like it creates this intellectual white noise.
That's a perfect description. The source calls it the mumbling lecturer tone. It's the predictability that's key. The narratives are written to have no real conflict because the authors all seem to believe that everything will turn out fine in the end.
It's always an uplifting story.
Always. The tension is just gone. You, as the reader, you already know that despite setbacks, the United States overcame these challenges. It's a solved equation. So why would you bother debating any of it?
And that overload of detail just makes it worse. The sources point out authors feel like they have to include a paragraph on every single president. Even, Millard Fillmore or Chester A. Arthur.
Right, figures you're meant to immediately forget.
Exactly. If you remember nothing about them, the textbook has done its job. One book they looked at had 444 main ideas at the end of its chapters. And even with all that, they still produce what Loewen calls startling errors of omission and distortion.
And those errors are just baked into the system. Frances Fitzgerald pointed this out way back in 1979. She saw how textbooks distorted the Spanish impact on the Americas, and she predicted it would change.
But it hasn't.
It has not happened. Decades later, it's the same story. It shows the systemic rigidity. The books are designed to minimize risk, to avoid controversy. The authors say they offer reasoned judgments.
Which is, of course, the trick. A reasoned judgment just means the debate is over.
Precisely. It kills any reason for a student to question the text. If the book gives you the answer, why would you look at the evidence? The whole point of history, that it's a dynamic debate, is just gone.
So you've got the dullness, the information overload, the baked-in errors. But the real engine of this myth-making, the thing that makes it all palatable, is this process Loewen calls heroification.
Yes, heroification. He describes it as a degenerative process, almost like calcification. It takes these incredibly complex, flawed, real human beings and turns them into pious, perfect creatures without conflicts, pain, credibility, or human interest.
Just statues.
Exactly. Untouchable statues.
And this isn't just sloppy writing, right? This is intentional.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are very clear this is done consciously. Authors leave out the blemishes, the ugly parts, to make historical figures sympathetic to as many people as possible. They're trying to satisfy this demand that textbooks present patriots in a way that honors and respects them.
It's all about the political utility of the hero. They have to be perfect so the nation they represent seems perfect.
Right. And the irony is you end up with this parade of bland, perfect stick figures that are so unbelievable, so too good to be real, that students just become cynical. It makes history itself seem like a lie.
To really get how damaging this is, we have to look at the examples. The sources detail two really powerful ones, Helen Keller and Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, these are perfect case studies. We all think we know them, but the versions we learn are so incomplete, they're basically lies.
So, Helen Keller, the inspirational symbol. The myth is so powerful, right? The woman who overcame disability. But textbooks just stop her story. They leave out the last 64 years of her life.
64 years. They tell the story of her as a child, learning to communicate, and then she pretty much vanishes.
As if her life's work was just learning to speak.
And by doing that, they erase the entire content of her adult life. Helen Keller, the woman who fought so hard to have a voice, used that voice for radical social change. She was a committed socialist.
A fact that is completely scrubbed from the curriculum.
Completely. Because it's politically inconvenient, she was an anti-capitalist who saw a direct link between the struggles of the working class and the disabled.
And she wasn't just a thinker. She was an activist. She helped found the ACLU.
Right. She supported Eugene V. Debs, the socialist candidate, in all of his campaigns for president, even when he was running from a prison cell.
And she sent $100 to the NAACP in the 1920s. For a white woman from Alabama, that was a seriously radical act.
A profound act. And what's really crucial is that later in her life, she realized that her own success wasn't just about her individual effort. She wrote that she forgot she owed her triumph to her family's wealth and connections, the fact that they could afford specialized teachers.
Which is the exact opposite of the American individualism myth.
It completely contradicts it. So by leaving out her radical politics, her complex thoughts, she just becomes this empty, mythic figure. And students get no understanding of causality in history. They just see the inspiration, not the substance.
And the result of that?
Well, the students find the symbol too good to be real, and they start telling Helen Keller jokes. The sources suggest it's a coping mechanism, a way to deflate this pretentious symbol that just doesn't feel human. You erase the truth, and all you're left with is a target for cynicism.
Okay, so if Keller's about erasing political radicalism, Woodrow Wilson is a case study in sanitizing racism and interventionism.
Absolutely. The myth is the flawless progressive, the man who led the U.S. into World War I, championed the League of Nations, supported women's suffrage.
But the domestic reality is stunningly different.
It is. Wilson wasn't just, a product of his time. He was an outspoken white supremacist. His administration racially segregated the entire federal government.
The first time that had happened since Reconstruction?
Yes. And when black federal employees protested, he had them fired. This is a massive black mark on a so-called progressive hero.
And the textbooks, how do they handle that?
They mostly don't. Of the 12 textbooks Loewen surveyed, only 4 even mention the segregation policy accurately. The others either ignore it, minimize it, or, you won't believe this, they just invent a happy ending where the policies gradually were ended.
They just lie.
They do. The goal is to keep Wilson's progressive halo in place, no matter what the historical record says about the systemic racism he enforced.
And it's the same pattern with his foreign policy. He's portrayed as this great idealist, but the reality is much more aggressive.
Oh, much more. Under Wilson, the U.S. intervened militarily in Latin America more than at any other time in our history. Troops in Mexico multiple times. He occupied Haiti in 1915, the Dominican Republic in 1916. He basically used force to decide who ran Nicaragua.
And then there's Russia, which is almost never mentioned.
It's incredible. In 1918, he sent American forces into Russia to actively try and overthrow the Bolshevik Revolution.
A direct military intervention.
A direct, aggressive intervention that fueled Soviet suspicion for decades, right through the Cold War. But the textbooks, they either skip it entirely, or when they do mention Latin America, they wriggle to get the hero off the hook.
I found the language they used to do that, Judd, so cynical. They blame things on forces he could not control. Or they use the passive voice.
Yes, the passive voice is the tell. It's the smoking gun. They'll say something like, our forces withdrew from Mexico, but they never say who ordered them in. Nobody is specified as having ordered them in. It's a perfect tool for heroification. The bad thing happened, but the hero isn't responsible.
And the sources point out this hero-making of Wilson wasn't immediate. In the 1920s, he was pretty widely disliked.
That's a key insight. It shows how political needs shaped the stories we tell. After World War II, the U.S. adopted this very interventionist foreign policy.
Wilsonian ideal.
Exactly. The idea of American exceptionalism backed by force. And to justify that new global role, they needed a clean origin story. So textbook authors started to downplay or excuse Wilson's blunders to keep that idealist archetype pure.
So now we get to the very foundation of American myth, Christopher Columbus.
The big one.
one of only 2 people honored by name with a national holiday. Textbooks give him all this space, this glowing praise, and yet the source material says basically everything in the traditional story is wrong or unverifiable.
Well, the first big distortion is just context. His voyage was important, yes, but it wasn't the first discovery. It was one of the last in a long, long line of voyages across the Atlantic. His real importance is about how Europe responded.
Because of changing social conditions? The rise of a merchant class.
Right, and the need for new trade routes. But the source is very clear about Columbus's own motivation. It was about conquest and exploitation.
He wasn't looking for trade, he was looking for gold.
100%. He wrote about it all the time. Gold is most excellent. Gold constitutes treasure, and he who has it does all he wants in the world. But textbooks downplay that because, exploring America just for profit doesn't seem dignified for a hero, so they swap in piety and curiosity for greed and exploitation.
And to make Columbus seem like this singular, unique hero, the textbooks have to systematically ignore all the people who came before him.
Which is a huge omission, and it reinforces this deeply ethnocentric worldview. I mean, take the Vikings. We know they had settlements in North America around the year of Unsum 5. They stayed for years, and this was known in Europe for centuries.
But textbooks either ignore it or say they just, touched the shore briefly?
Exactly. They minimize it, ignoring that it was an organized settlement.
And the sources go even deeper into possibilities that are even more disruptive to that Eurocentric narrative.
Yeah, they talk about the evidence for Afro-Phoenicians reaching the Americas as early as 750 BC. The evidence they cite includes things like the colossal Olmec heads in Mexico, which have features some archaeologists describe as amazingly Negroid, and also the discovery of an African gold alloy called guanine in Hispaniola when Columbus arrived.
So why is it so important to leave all of this out?
Because if you exclude these non-European voyagers, Viking, African, whoever, you get to reinforce this toxic idea that all modern knowledge, all technology, all navigation is exclusively a European invention. It lets you stick to the narrative that before Europe, there was nothing. It's ethnocentrism disguised as history.
And that narrative is what allows the textbooks to just glide over the brutal reality of what happened next. The reign of terror in Haiti after Columbus arrived. We have to get into the details here because this is what's actively censored.
It's a nightmare scenario. Columbus's main tool was brutality. He would order his men to cut off people's ears or noses for minor offenses and send them back to their villages as a warning. In 1495, he launched this massive slave raid. Rounded up 1,500 Arawak people. 200 of them died just on the voyage back to Spain. And he was explicit about his plan, writing to the king and queen that we can send from here all the slaves, which could be sold.
This isn't exploration. It's a resource extraction plan based on pure terror.
It was. And then he set up the tribute system. Every single Arawak person over the age of 14 had to bring him a certain amount of gold dust every 3 months.
And the detail that is so shocking and so universally left out is the punishment for failing.
The punishment for not bringing the gold or for not having your little token to prove you'd paid was to have your hands cut off.
My God.
This system, and what followed, kicked off one of the first, most complete genocides in human history. The population of Haiti might have been as high as 8 million people. By 1555, it was basically zero.
So the complete annihilation of an entire people in just over 60 years. And it was started directly by our national hero.
Directly. And yet, only one of the textbooks surveyed even mentions the extermination. And not a single 10 mentions Columbus's direct role in it. They hide it to protect the origin myth, the myth that says, he was good, and so are we.
This theme of just erasing people, it continues when textbooks get to other marginalized groups, especially Native Americans. Let's talk about the myth of Thanksgiving.
Right. The first thing textbooks get wrong is this idea that the Pilgrims arrived in some empty wilderness.
Which is completely untrue.
Completely. Southern New England was more like a managed park, thanks to native land practices. The Pilgrims settled in a place called Patuxet, which was Squanto's village, a village that had just been wiped out.
And this is the most important geopolitical event of the era, which is almost totally omitted from the books. The plague.
The massive plague that swept the coast just before the Pilgrims arrived. We're talking mortality rates of 90 to 96%.
It's a demographic catastrophe.
It reshaped the entire continent. William Bradford, the Pilgrim leader, he saw it as an act of God, saying God had cleared our title to this place. The fact is, the British faced no real challenge for 50 years because of that devastation. But the textbooks suppressed that. They need the myth of the Pilgrims succeeding through sheer grit, not because a pandemic paved the way for them.
And there's an even more crucial omission, one that really undermines the whole idea of European superiority, the fact that Europeans defected to native societies.
This is maybe the most devastating fact for the myth of progress. Thousands of Europeans and enslaved Africans chose to go Indian. A writer at the time, Crève Coeur, noted that thousands of Europeans are Indians, and we have no examples of even one having from choice become Europeans.
Thousands of people defecting from the superior civilization. Why?
Because native societies offered more freedom, less hierarchy, more social connection than the rigid colonial world, and suppressing that fact goes right to the core of American ideology. If our culture was so great, why were people running away from it?
It calls the entire idea of progress into question.
It absolutely does. The source points out that the American colonists were just as embarrassed by this as the Soviets were by their defectors, and they dealt with it the same way, by just erasing it from the history books.
And shifting to internal issues, the books do the same thing with class. They just suppress any discussion of class conflict to promote this idea of American exceptionalism, that we're a land of equality.
And they do it mainly by just not mentioning it. The data is shocking. 6 of the 12 textbooks they looked at have no index listing for social class, income distribution, or working class.
They just pretend it doesn't exist.
They pretend we're all one big middle-class nation, which is a problem because the U.S. has some of the highest economic inequality in the developed world. By ignoring class, you leave students as terrible sociologists. They have no tools to understand poverty, so they just end up blaming the poor for being poor. It's all driven by publisher censorship and the fear of being called a Marxist.
And we see this sanitizing process again with a figure like Abraham Lincoln. They have to censor him to keep the hero intact.
Right. To keep the great emancipator myth pure, they have to cut out his racist comments, especially from the Lincoln-Douglas debates. The source quotes him saying, "I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about the social and political equality of the white and black races."
That's a devastating quote. It changes everything.
It does, and censoring it protects us from a racist Lincoln. But it also prevents us from understanding his growth. If Lincoln could be racist and then evolve, maybe the rest of us can too. By sanitizing him, we lose that whole dramatic story of his moral evolution.
And finally, the story of Reconstruction is twisted to basically let white people off the hook.
Completely. Textbooks frame the failure of Reconstruction not as a result of violent, organized white resistance, the terrorism, the murders, but as a problem of integrating helpless and destitute blacks into society.
They blame the victims.
They blame the victims for not assimilating fast enough. They'll say that African Americans could not be converted in 10 years into literate voters. They sidestep the real issue, which was the violent refusal of former Confederates to accept a new reality. And by being unable to say anything bad about white people, they deny African Americans their agency in their own struggle for freedom.
So let's turn to the why. The institutional and psychological reasons this feel-good history is so persistent. It seems like the whole system is built to resist the truth.
Oh, it is. And a huge part of it is commercial. It's about money. Controversy is a risk. And the main pressure comes from huge adoption states like Texas and California. Their buying power dictates what the rest of the country gets.
So publishers are trying to offend absolutely no one.
Exactly. The goal is a balanced approach, which really just means bland and non-offensive, so you can lock in those multi-million-dollar contracts. It's why they keep churning out the next triumph of the American nation instead of books that actually engage with labor history or feminist history.
And this resistance is especially strong when it comes to the recent past. The sources talk about this Sasha versus Zamani distinction.
Right. Zamani is the deep past. We can handle a complex George Washington who owned slaves but was also a founding father. But Sasha is the recent past, the history that still affects us. Vietnam, the civil rights movement, that gets suppressed because the arguments are still raw and the people are still alive.
And you see that most clearly with the Vietnam War. The textbooks just erase the searing images that define that conflict.
They're gone, down the memory hole. The photo of the napalmed girl, the Saigon police chief executing a man on the street, the chaotic evacuation from the embassy. The sources say these images violate taboos against showing suffering and violence. But more than that, they challenge the idea of America as a supremely moral nation.
The scale of what's left out is incredible.
It is. The U.S. dropped 3 times more bombs on Vietnam than in all of World War II combined. Yet you will find no photographs of the destruction caused by the U.S. side in these textbooks. Only one book had even one of those famous images. If you show the destruction, you risk making the heroic state look not so heroic.
And the impact is that the entire anti-war movement becomes incomprehensible. If you leave out Muhammad Ali's quote, "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger," how can a student possibly understand why people were protesting?
You can't. And that feeds this bigger myth of the heroic state. The government is always presented as this rational, benevolent force, like a kind of Salvation Army to the rest of the world. The books become anti-citizenship manuals. They teach you to accept, not to question.
And to do that, they have to ignore corporate influence on foreign policy and, most importantly, actual government criminality.
Right. They ignore the CIA-backed coups in Iran in '53 and Guatemala in '54. U.S. policy is always presented as humanitarian. The other side is just chaos or communism, not rational actors, just evil that needs to be stopped.
The distortion of the civil rights movement might be the most dangerous example. The textbooks credit JFK and the federal government for the laws, which completely reverses cause and effect.
It's a total reversal. The sources are clear. It was the courageous acts of citizens, the marches, the sit-ins that forced the government to act. It wasn't a gift from the top down. And what's worse, they completely omit the government's criminality.
J. Edgar Hoover's campaign to destroy Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes. The wiretaps, the attempts to blackmail him, sending him that anonymous tape, urging him to commit suicide.
The FBI, the top law enforcement agency, was actively trying to destroy the movement's leader.
Exactly. But the textbooks present the government as the savior. And this is so disempowering for students, especially African-American students. It makes them feel like their communities have never done anything. It sacrifices the truth just to venerate the state.
So where does this all leave us? What does this feel-good history actually do to students and to democracy in the long run? It seems to just reinforce this blind faith in progress.
That's the core of it. The archetype is progress is our most important product. It's a belief that supports the status quo. It teaches you that to make things better, we just have to do more of the same. The pie is always getting bigger, problems always get solved.
How do they maintain that illusion when they run into things like, say, the energy crisis?
They mention the oil crises of the '70s, but then they immediately reassure you that the government provided immediate solutions. They talk about Nixon's plan for energy independence, a plan that completely failed and made us more dependent. This blind optimism stops students from engaging with really critical modern issues like the tragedy of the commons.
Explain that a bit more. That's a powerful idea for understanding resource problems.
It's crucial. The historical analogy is a shared pasture in old New England. Every family, acting in their own rational self-interest, adds another cow to graze until the pasture is destroyed and everyone is ruined.
Individual, rational choices leading to collective disaster.
Exactly, and that concept is essential for understanding climate change, resource depletion, things that require new kinds of cooperation, things that challenge the idea that more growth is always progress. But because the textbooks avoid all that,
they leave students completely unprepared for the future. The source calls this optimism not merely irrelevant but dangerous. If you're taught the government always has an easy fix, you won't feel the urgency to demand the real hard changes we might need to survive.
So what's Loewen's ultimate solution? It's not just about memorizing a new, different set of facts, is it?
No, not at all. That would just be swapping one ideology for another. His goal is to teach history as argumentation based on evidence. Students need to learn how to ask questions, how to challenge the narrative, how to deal with a messy past. We have to balance national pride with critical self-knowledge. Confronting these myths isn't unpatriotic, it's necessary.
Which brings us to that final, really provocative question the source material leaves us with. Why do adults lie to children about history? I think there are a few reasons. One is this belief that they have to protect students from unpleasantries, that kids are too fragile to handle the truth about genocide or state-sponsored racism. Or, maybe more cynically, they want to keep kids from becoming too idealistic and questioning authority.
It's about control.
It's about control and demanding loyalty. But the question Loewen asks is, if the country is so wonderful, why do we have to lie about it? Lying just diminishes us. The only defense, in the end, is for all of us to become blur critical thinkers, to become, as the source puts it, effective crap detectors who can tell the truth from the myth. That's the only way to make sure democracy actually works.
If you'd like a short visual summary of Lies My Teacher Told Me, you can also watch the mini explainer version. Use the link in the description or click the video that may appear on your screen. Thanks for listening.